Kapitän-Leutnant Klaus Richter held his breath. The scent of diesel and stale sweat thickened the cramped U-boat. The message, delivered by the unbreakable Enigma code, was clear. A fat, slow convoy, ripe for the picking, should be right in his sights. But as he scanned the horizon, there was nothing but empty, mocking waves. He couldn't know that hundreds of miles away, in a quiet English countryside estate, a man who preferred puzzles to people was reading his secret orders faster than his own commanders. The entire war was about to pivot on a secret that Germany would not learn for years. A secret that would cost them everything. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The claustrophobic interior of U-556, a German Type 7C submarine, was a world unto itself, a sealed steel tube plunged into the hostile depths of the Atlantic. The air, a foul cocktail of diesel fumes, unwashed bodies, and the lingering ghost of fried bratwurst, was so thick you could almost taste it. Every sound was magnified, the constant deep hum of the electric motors a reassuring heartbeat, the groan and creak of the hull under immense pressure, a constant reminder of the crushing weight of the ocean just inches away. The radio operator, his face pale in the glow of his equipment, moved with a reverent caution as he approached his commander. He held a single sheet of paper, a freshly decoded message from the enigmatic machine that was Germany's greatest strength. Kapitän-Leutnant Klaus Richter, a man whose youth was belied by the cold confidence in his eyes, took the decrypt. His ambition was a palpable force within the U-boat, a fire that warmed the chilled steel. He was a true believer, not just in the Reich, but in its technological supremacy, an ideology embodied by the flawless clicks of the Enigma's rotors. The message was concise, beautiful in its deadly simplicity. It contained the precise coordinates and heading of Allied convoy HX-29. A grim smile touched Richter's lips. He could already picture the columns of smoke on the horizon, the satisfying crunch of torpedoes against hull plating. He imagined the tonnage report he would send back to Admiral Dönitz. Another victory for the wolfpacks, another nail in Britain's coffin. "Course 215, he commanded, his voice cutting through the low hum of the submarine. "Full speed. We will be on them by nightfall." The crew, a well-oiled machine of disciplined men, moved with practiced efficiency. A ripple of predatory excitement, a shared bloodlust, passed through the vessel. They were the wolves of the sea, and they had the scent of their prey. They arrived at the rendezvous point as the last light bled from the sky, the sea turning from slate gray to an inky, menacing black. Hours crawled by. Richter remained glued to the attack periscope, his hands gripping the handles so tightly his knuckles were white. The initial thrill of the hunt had long since evaporated, replaced by a slow-burning confusion that was beginning to curdle into a hot, biting irritation. The sea was empty. Utterly, profoundly empty. The green distorted view through the periscope lens offered nothing but an endless expanse of rolling, mocking waves. His first watch officer, Gunther, a man whose cynicism was as weathered as his face, stood beside him. Gunther was older, his loyalty to Richter unquestionable, but his faith in perfect plans had been eroded by too many years at sea. "Perhaps a lookout on a freighter was lucky, Capitan," Gunther offered, his voice a low rumble. "Or the Atlantic swell is hiding them. They could be just over the horizon." Richter lowered the periscope with a frustrated sigh, the metal handles cold against his skin. The cold sweat on his brow had nothing to do with the temperature in the control room. "The timing was perfect, Gunther. The calculations were flawless." He tapped the decoded message, which he had folded neatly and placed in his breast pocket. "The Admiral's office itself sent this. The intelligence is flawless. They should be here." He could feel the weight of his crew's expectation, their silent anticipation turning to a shared, unspoken disappointment. He felt the immense pressure from high command, from Dönitz himself, who did not tolerate failure. An entire convoy, dozens of lumbering merchant ships and their escorts, could not simply vanish into thin air. The vibration of the engines through the steel floor felt different now, less a sound of power and more a monotonous, pointless drone. The acrid smell of ozone from the radio equipment seemed to sting his nostrils. "Report to HQ," Richter said, his voice tight with a frustration he could no longer conceal. Position unchanged, no contact. Something is wrong. He did not yet allow the flicker of doubt to touch the Enigma itself. That was unthinkable. The machine was infallible. The doubt was a seed, planting itself in the soil of the intelligence source, a spy, a reconnaissance flight, something human and fallible. But the seed was there, and it was unsettling. Hundreds of miles to the east, in a place that could not have been more different from the iron coffin of U-5A-56, the ghost convoy's salvation was being orchestrated. Hut 8 at Bletchley Park was not a place of military discipline, but of intense, almost monastic concentration. It was a large, drafty wooden hut, one of many scattered across the quiet English countryside estate. The air here was a different blend of smells, damp tweed, the sweet, cloying aroma of stale pipe smoke, and the unique, sharp scent of hot electronics. The only sound was the incessant rhythmic clatter of machinery, a metallic symphony of whirring gears and clicking relays that was the voice of Alan Turing's electromechanical bomb machines. Piles of paper, half-empty teacups, and chalk-dusted blackboards cluttered every available surface. Here, in this academic chaos, the wizards of Bletchley Park were performing their daily magic. Alan Turing, a man who often seemed more comfortable in the abstract world of logic and patterns than in human company, was muttering to himself, his eyes fixed on a string of decrypted German naval characters. It was the very same message that had sent Klaus Richter on his wild goose chase. Beside him, Eleanor Vance watched, her expression a mixture of focus and concern. She was one of the few cryptanalysts who could keep pace with Turing's frantic, leaping thought processes, her sharp intuition often providing the human-centric insight his purely logical mind lacked. She saw the patterns not just in the letters, but in the people who sent them. Suddenly, Turing stopped muttering. A quiet exclamation escaped his lips, a soft, breathy, "Of course!" He snatched a pencil and scribbled furiously on a notepad, his hand flying across the paper. The operator's laziness. He used his girlfriend's initials again. CIL, it's silly, that's our key. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated genius, a flash of insight that connected a lovelorn German radio operator to the fate of thousands of men. With the key, the bomb machine could be set. Within minutes, the full message was decoded, its terrible purpose laid bare on the page. Eleanor's face grew grim as she read it. "They're sending 3 boats," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's a trap, not a hunt. The convoy will sail right into them in less than 12 hours. She moved to a massive map of the Atlantic that covered an entire wall, a god's eye view of the deadly game being played out across the ocean. With a piece of chalk, she traced the convoy's route and the U-boat's planned intercept path. The lines converged in a small, insignificant-looking patch of blue that represented a future graveyard. They rushed the intelligence to Commander Alistair Finch, the pragmatic Royal Navy liaison officer who served as the bridge between the eccentric boffins and the grim realities of the war. Finch was waiting anxiously in a nearby office, the ever-present tension of his role etched on his face. He took the decrypt, his expression hardening as he read. The intellectual thrill of the chase that animated Turing was gone, replaced by the cold, hard calculus of life and death. "Right," Finch said, his voice clipped and decisive. "Get this to the Admiralty. Top priority ultra. Tell them to divert HX-229, course 270, effective immediately. God help us if they don't listen." As Eleanor watched him go, she felt a strange, disquieting connection to the anonymous men whose lives were being manipulated like chess pieces on her map. The U-boat crews hunting in the dark and the convoy sailors sailing toward an ambush they would now never see. Finch, for his part, felt the immense, crushing pressure of betting thousands of lives and millions of tons of vital supplies on the work of these strange, brilliant academics and their clattering machines. In his immaculate, imposing office in Berlin, Admiral Karl Dönitz, the brilliant and ruthless commander of the U-boat fleet, felt no such uncertainty. His headquarters, the Befehlshaber der U-Boote, was a place of quiet, ruthless efficiency. The scent of expensive cigar smoke and floor polish hung in the air. A massive wall map of the Atlantic, a twin to the one at Bletchley Park but dotted with German flags, dominated the room. For Dönitz, this map was a chessboard, and he was its grand master. He reviewed the after-action reports from the previous day, his stern expression unreadable. Among them was Richter's report, a frustrating tale of a phantom convoy. An aide summarized the various possibilities: freak weather, a chance encounter with an Allied long-range patrol aircraft, a lucky, unscheduled course change by the convoy commodore. Dönitz listened, his fingers steepled before him, his gaze distant. He dismissed them all with a wave of his hand. "Luck?" he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "One boat, perhaps. An entire wolf pack, no. The British are not that lucky." He rose and walked to the wall map, considering the vastness of the ocean. His faith in his system, in his strategy, and above all, in his perfect weapon, the Enigma, was absolute. The machine was a mathematical certainty. It could not be broken. Therefore, the failure had to be human. "Their intelligence is good," he mused, more to himself than to his aide, "but it is conventional. Spies, traitors, not machines." He concluded that a spy at the docks in Halifax must have seen the convoy's initial departure en route, warning the Allies before it ever cleared the coast. The solution, then, was not to question the machine, but to tighten the human element around it. He turned to his aide, his eyes cold with renewed resolve. He would outsmart their conventional espionage. "The machine is perfect," he declared, the statement a matter of indisputable fact. "We are being compromised on the ground, not over the air. We will tighten our radio discipline." He dictated a new order. From now on, final intercept coordinates for the wolfpacks would be withheld until the last possible moment, transmitted only when the U-boats were already at sea and far from any potential spies. It was a decision born of unshakable arrogance, a belief that he could make his perfect weapon even more potent. On a nearby table, an Enigma machine sat in its wooden case, its polished surface glinting in the light. A silent, potent symbol of a genius that was already, unknowingly, obsolete. Several months later, the triumphant mood in Hut 8 had evaporated, replaced by a thick, choking fog of desperation and exhaustion. The music of the bombs, the incessant rhythmic clatter that had become the soundtrack to their secret victories, had fallen silent. The oppressive quiet was a constant screaming reminder of their failure. Overflowing ashtrays and a graveyard of half-empty mugs of cold tea littered every surface. The air, once electric with intellectual fervor, was now stale and smoky, heavy with the weight of unspoken fear. The Germans, in a move of devastating consequence, had introduced a new, four-rotor Enigma machine for their U-boat fleet. Bletchley Park had codenamed it Shark, and it had bitten them hard. The old three-rotor methods were now useless. For weeks they had been completely blind. The vital flow of ultra-intelligence had been severed at its source. Out in the cold, dark Atlantic, the price of their blindness was being paid in fire and steel. The shipping losses had skyrocketed. In the Admiralty's operations room, the great map of the ocean was becoming a constellation of death, the small red lights representing lost ships multiplying at a terrifying rate. Britain was bleeding, its lifeline from America being systematically severed, one torpedo at a time. Commander Finch, his face a mask of grim fatigue, felt the pressure from an Admiralty that was beginning to lose faith in the goose that laid the golden eggs. He, in turn, had no choice but to transfer that pressure onto the one man who could possibly fix it. Alan. "For God's sake, they're slaughtering us out there," Finch pleaded, his voice raw. He stood in the center of the silent hut, a stark naval uniform amidst the chaos of tweed and chalk dust. "We're losing a dozen ships a night. The Americans are threatening to suspend the convoys. I need something. Anything." Alan Turing was working himself to the point of collapse. He was a wraith, fueled by nicotine, caffeine, and sheer intellectual frustration. He-Chain smoked constantly, barely sleeping, his eyes red, rimmed, and wild. His colleagues gave him a wide berth. He snapped at anyone who dared interrupt his frantic circular thoughts. His pride, the immense towering pride of a genius who had tamed the beast of Enigma once, was deeply wounded. "Don't you think I know that?" he retorted, his voice cracking with strain. He gestured wildly at a blackboard covered in incomprehensible equations. "It's like the universe has added a new variable. It's mathematically infuriating. It was Eleanor Vance who saw the crack in the armor. While Turing and the others threw themselves against the main Shark naval cipher, a seemingly impenetrable wall of cryptographic complexity, she had turned her attention to the periphery. She noticed a pattern in the short signal weather reports, the Wetter-Kurzschlüssel, that boats transmitted daily. They were sent from the same 4 rotor machines. But the procedure was slightly different perhaps, she reasoned, a little less stringent. She felt it was a human pattern, a touch of laziness or procedural shortcut that a purely mathematical mind might overlook. She approached Turing cautiously, a fresh cup of tea in her hand as a peace offering. "Professor, forget the main traffic for a moment," she began, her voice calm and steady. "Look at the weather reports. They're sent from the same machines. What if the operators are getting lazy? What if the settings are simpler? The report itself is highly structured. We know it will contain words like wetter and Vulcan. What if we use that known plaintext as a crib?" Turing initially waved her away, dismissing the idea as too simple, a distraction from the core mathematical problem. But he paused, the cigarette halfway to his lips. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time in days. The logic of her suggestion, its elegant simplicity, began to dawn on him. He had been trying to smash the door down, while she had just found a key left under the mat. A long silence stretched, broken only by the sound of rain drumming against the hut's roof. "My dear Eleanor," he said finally, his voice filled with a newfound respect, "that is the most beautifully logical thing I have heard in a month. It's elegant. It might just work." A frantic, desperate energy surged through the hut. The team, galvanized by this new hope, descended upon one of the silent bombs, wiring its complex tangle of cables and relays to test Eleanor's theory. They configured it with the known plaintext of a weather report, a gamble that a German operator's predictable habits would give them the foothold they needed. The machine whirred to life, its drums spinning, its relays beginning their frantic, chattering search through millions of possibilities. Hours passed. The tension was unbearable. Then, it happened. The machine, which had been clattering away in a deafening, monotonous rhythm, suddenly, abruptly, stopped. The silence that followed was not the oppressive quiet of failure, but the golden, breathless silence of success. They had found the day's settings, the flow of ultra-intelligence, the lifeblood of their war effort, resumed. Finch, summoned by a jubilant analyst, felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees, a relief tinged with the grim, chilling knowledge of how perilously close they had come to absolute failure. The direct, real-world application of that success was felt by men who would never know its source. On the bridge of the British merchant freighter, the stalwart Hart, Captain Davies stared out at the vast, gray expanse of the Atlantic. His ship was one of dozens in a sprawling convoy, a veritable city on the water, plowing through the waves with a monotonous, engine-thrumming boredom that was always mixed with a low-grade, simmering fear. Davies was a veteran of the sea, a grumpy, pragmatic man who trusted his own decades of experience far more than he trusted orders from on high. The weather was cold, the sky the color of lead, and the taste of salt spray was a constant presence on his lips. Suddenly, a signal lamp began to flash from the escorting destroyer, its bright, sharp light cutting through the gloom. A young rating on the wing of the bridge called out the message, which was relayed to Davies. The order was simple, and to Captain Davies, utterly inexplicable. All ships alter course 15 degrees to starboard. New heading 285. Execute immediately. Davies let out a string of curses, his voice a low growl of pure frustration. He complained loudly to his first mate, a younger man who knew better than to argue. 15 degrees? Are they mad? Davies fumed, gesturing at the empty ocean. There's nothing out there but more water. Some pencil pusher in London with a map and a dart, I'll wager. The new course will add half a day to our journey, burn precious fuel we can ill afford to waste, and it takes us toward a weather system I was hoping to avoid. It makes no logical sense. The first mate simply nodded. Orders are orders, Captain. Davies sighed, the anger draining out of him, replaced by a weary resignation. I'll follow them. But it doesn't mean I have to like it. Ring it down to the engine room. Let's see what this wild goose chase costs us." He gave the order to the helmsman. The massive ship groaned as its rudder turned, the hull vibrating with the strain. All around them, as far as the eye could see, the other ships in the convoy, dozens of smokestacks stretching to the horizon, began the same slow, ponderous, seemingly pointless turn. It was a maneuver of immense scale, a coordinated dance on an empty stage, dictated by an invisible hand. Unseen by them, miles away on their original course, the periscopes of Klaus Richter's waiting wolfpack were at that very moment breaking the surface, rising into an ocean that was, once again, maddeningly, inexplicably empty. Back at Bletchley Park, the restored flow of information marked a crucial turning point. In Commander Finch's office, the atmosphere was no longer defensive, but predatory. The map on the wall was no longer just a tool for evasion. It was becoming a tool for hunting. Finch spread a new set of decrypts across his desk. Among them were Klaus Richter's increasingly furious and undisciplined messages to Dönitz, complaining about phantom convoys and faulty intelligence from headquarters. Eleanor, who had been tasked with analyzing the tone and content of officer communications, pointed to one of Richter's messages. "Look here," she said, her finger tracing the angry German text. "Richter is becoming emotional. His messages are less disciplined. He's accusing High Command of blunders. This is creating discord and suspicion within the U-boat command structure." But there was something else, something far more important. The decrypts, painstakingly pieced together from the weather cribs, revealed the locations of the German Milchküche, the large, vulnerable Type 14 supply U-boats used to refuel and rearm the wolfpacks deep at sea. Eleanor pointed to a series of grid squares on the map. "The wolfpacks are congregating in these specific areas, waiting for their supplies," she explained. "For a few hours during refueling, they are at their most vulnerable. They are sitting ducks." A hard, dangerous light entered Finch's eyes. He saw an opportunity to change the entire nature of the war at sea. He proposed a radical new strategy, a shift from passive defense to active offense. "Instead of just diverting our convoys away from them," he said, his voice low and intense as he tapped a grid square on the map, "we will use this intelligence to actively hunt the hunters. This is where they all go to drink, the milk cows. If we take them out, the wolves starve." He looked from Eleanor to Turing. "We stop dodging them, and we start killing them. We will send dedicated destroyer, hunter-killer groups to these refueling coordinates and wait for them." Alan Turing, who had been listening in silence, was visibly troubled. A shadow passed over his face. His work, until this moment, had been an abstract puzzle, a godlike game of moving pieces on a board to save lives. This new application was different. It was about actively, deliberately taking them. He saw the direct, unbreakable causal link between his decryption, his intellectual breakthrough, and a planned, cold-blooded ambush. "But this is different," he stammered, the words catching in his throat. "Before, we were moving our pieces away from theirs. Now you're asking me to tell you where to place our pieces to eliminate them. It's not a puzzle anymore, it's an execution order." The abstract puzzle had become a concrete weapon, and he could feel its terrible weight in his hands. He felt a profound sense of complicity, a moral crisis that the others, caught up in the military necessity, did not seem to share. Finch's expression was resolute, embodying the brutal, pragmatic mindset of a nation fighting for its very survival. He looked at Turing not with unkindness, but with an unyielding firmness. "It's war, Alan," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "And you've just handed us a sword. It would be immoral not to use it." He picked up a red pencil and drew a stark circle around one of the refueling coordinates on the map. A circle that looked like a drop of blood on the vast blue paper. The quiet intensity in the room was suffocating. The light from the window caught the dust motes dancing in the air, a peaceful, mundane sight that stood in stark contrast to the deadly plans being laid. The decision was made. The wizards of Bletchley Park were no longer just guardians. They were becoming assassins. The Atlantic was a vast, waiting predator, and on its surface, HMS Harrier was a patient hunter. The destroyer, part of a dedicated hunter-killer group, lay in absolute silence, its engines cut, drifting on a deceptively calm sea. The coordinates, delivered with the highest possible priority from the Admiralty, were precise. There was nothing to see, nothing on the radar, nothing but the endless gray water meeting a gray sky. Yet, they waited. Every man on board was a coiled spring of anticipation, their grim purpose a silent shared bond. Then, the lookout's voice, sharp and clear in the quiet air, broke the stillness. "Contact, sir! You, boat on the surface, bearing 090. It was not a sleek, predatory attack submarine that breached the surface, but a large, clumsy giant. You, Farwas 61, a milch coup, rose from the depths, its crew emerging onto the deck, expecting to meet Klaus Richter's wolfpack for a routine refueling. They were fatally wrong. The British captain's voice was cold steel. "All ships, open fire, illuminate the target." In an instant, the night was torn apart. Blinding searchlights snapped on, pinning the supply U-boat in their merciless glare like a terrified animal. The thunderous roar of the destroyer's guns shattered the silence. And the sea around U, Fishbrain 61, erupted in geysers of white water. The attack was a symphony of brutal efficiency. Shells, guided by the invisible hand of Bletchley Park, screamed across the water. The sickening crunch of metal striking metal echoed across the waves as the first shells found their mark, tearing through the U-boat's thin pressure hull. A few miles away, aboard U-556, Klaus Richter paced the cramped control room, his frustration mounting. A last-minute order, diverting him 20 miles south of the planned rendezvous, had delayed him. He had cursed the inconvenience, the inexplicable change that seemed to serve no purpose but to waste his fuel and his time. He and Gunther were on the bridge, scanning the horizon, when they heard it, a distant muffled thunder that was not weather. It was the sound of depth charges and heavy naval guns. Richter's blood ran cold. His radio operator, his face ashen, called up to him. "Capitan! A frantic signal from U-461. They are under attack. The operator's voice trailed off as the radio crackled, hissed, and then fell into an eerie, profound silence. "They're gone?" Richter stared into the darkness in the direction of the sounds, his mind racing. They were supposed to be there, at that exact spot, at that exact time. The last minute order, the one he had cursed, had not been an inconvenience. It had been his salvation. The suspicion that had been a nagging whisper in the back of his mind, the paranoia that had been growing since the phantom convoy, now solidified into a terrifying, unshakable certainty. It was not bad luck. It was not faulty intelligence. It was not a spy. It was something worse, something that felt like a supernatural dread, as if God himself was against them. "They were waiting for them," Richter said, his voice low and shaken, barely audible over the hum of his own boat. "They knew they would be there, just as they knew we would not be." Gunther stared at him, his weathered face a mask of confusion and fear. "But how, Capitan? How is it possible?" Richter turned to face his first officer, his eyes wide with a horror that went beyond the fear of battle. It was the horror of a man who realizes the rules of the game he is playing are a lie. "It is not possible," Richter whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "And yet, it is happening." He felt like a pawn on a chessboard, watched by an opponent who could see not only his every move, but his every thought, his every intention, before he even had it. The morale of his crew, once so high, had been shattered, replaced by a creeping, corrosive fear of an enemy they could not see, could not fight, and could not understand. In Berlin, the atmosphere in Admiral Dönitz's headquarters was no longer one of calm, ruthless efficiency. It had curdled into a state of barely suppressed panic and rage. The Great Wall map, once a symbol of his expanding power, had become a graveyard. The clusters of red pins marking lost U-boats were growing like a plague, a visual testament to a campaign that was bleeding out. The losses were catastrophic, unsustainable. In a desperate attempt to find an answer, Dönitz had convened a high-level commission, gathering his top cryptographers, naval engineers, and intelligence experts. He stood before them, his face a thunderous mask, his rage a symptom of his own terrifying powerlessness. He was a master strategist who had been blinded, and he could not bear it. The lead engineer, a precise academic man with trembling hands, stood to give his report. He had been tasked with the most sacred of investigations, to determine if the Enigma machine itself could be at fault. He staked his career, and likely his life, on his conclusion. "Admiral," he began, his voice strained, "I assure you, we have dismantled the machines. We have tested every rotor, every plug, every wire. The number of possible combinations is 158 million. A man testing one combination every second would need longer than the age of the universe to break it." He took a deep breath, meeting the Admiral's furious gaze. "It is not the machine. By every mathematical and mechanical measure, the Enigma machine is absolutely, positively unbreakable." Dönitz seized on the report like a drowning man seizing a raft. It was the confirmation his fortress of denial desperately needed. To admit Enigma was broken was to admit his entire worldview. His core belief in German technological and intellectual superiority was a catastrophic lie. He slammed his fist on the polished mahogany desk, the sound cracking through the tense silence of the room. "Then it is something else," he roared, his knuckles white. "Something we have not thought of, treachery, or some new devilish science from the British and Americans." He began to pace, his mind grasping for any explanation, no matter how outlandish, that did not involve the failure of his perfect machine. They must have developed a revolutionary new radar technology, something that can detect a submerged U-boat from hundreds of miles away. He spun on his staff. Or the leaks are the result of widespread, high-level espionage, traitors in our very midst. His voice dropped to a dangerous, determined whisper. "But it is not Enigma. I forbid anyone to suggest it again." His denial was now official policy. He ordered a massive, wasteful crash program to develop new radar, absorbent rubber coatings for the U-boats. He launched a brutal internal witch hunt for spies, tearing his own command structure apart with suspicion and paranoia, further destroying the morale of the very men he was sending to their deaths. He was trapped in a fortress of his own certainty, and with every decision, he added another stone to its walls, sealing himself off from a truth that was systematically destroying his U-boat arm. The year was 1946. The war was over. In a sparse gray interrogation room in Nuremberg, the man who had once commanded the entire German Navy sat at a simple wooden table. Admiral Karl Dönitz was now a prisoner of war, gaunt and defeated, but he still carried himself with a ghost of his former aristocratic pride. Opposite him sat Alistair Finch, no longer a harried commander, but a senior intelligence officer, his uniform decorated with the ribbons of a victor. He was calm, professional, and he held a thin file in his hands. This was not an interrogation about war crimes, Finch explained, but a debriefing for the historical record. Finch began by asking Dönitz about the turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. Dönitz, with a flash of his old fire, spoke of overwhelming Allied air power, of superior industrial production, of the sheer weight of numbers that had eventually crushed his elite force. He painted a picture of a heroic, outnumbered struggle against impossible odds. Finch listened patiently, nodding slightly, letting the defeated admiral make his case. Then he opened the file. The quiet rustle of the papers was the only sound in the stark room. "That was part of it, certainly," Finch said, his voice even and dispassionate. "But let me ask you, Admiral, were you ever concerned about the security of your Enigma communications?" Dönitz scoffed, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. "The machine was unbreakable," he stated, repeating the mantra that had become his final, unshakable truth. Finch looked down at the file, then back at Dönitz. He began to read, his voice devoid of malice or triumph. "Let me ask you about March 23rd, 1943, convoy HX 229. You ordered a wolfpack under the command of a Kapitan Lieutenant Richter to grid square AK-58. The convoy never arrived. Do you know why?" Finch paused, letting the question hang in the air. "Because we received a copy of your order at our facility in Bletchley Park, and we told the convoy commodore to turn 15 degrees to starboard." Dönitz stared, his mouth slightly agape. "A spy," he stammered. "We always assumed, a leak from the port." Finch slowly shook his head. There was no spy, Admiral. There was a professor of mathematics in a wooden hut. He continued, his voice a calm, methodical scalpel, dissecting Dönitz's entire reality. He detailed the shark blackout and the breakthrough using the short weather signals. He named the date and location of the sinking of the supply Boat U 461, the very ambush that had saved Richter's life. He matched every major German failure, every phantom convoy, every disastrous wolfpack ambush, with a corresponding Allied decrypt. We read everything, Admiral, Finch concluded, closing the file. Every order you sent, every patrol report, every frustrated message from your Kapitan Richter complaining about faulty intelligence. We called it Ultra, and it won us the Battle of the Atlantic. Dönitz listened, his face slowly draining of all color. The pride, the anger, the decades of carefully constructed denial, all of it fell away, replaced by a profound, hollowed out shock. The foundation of his entire career, his strategy, his belief in German genius, crumbled into dust in the quiet of that small, gray room. It was not the anger of being beaten by a stronger foe, it was the soul-crushing, humiliating realization of being utterly and completely outsmarted, of his own brilliance being rendered laughably irrelevant by a secret he couldn't even conceive of. The light from the single-barred window caught the dust motes dancing in the air, and a profound, echoing silence filled the space after Finch stopped speaking. Dönitz's posture visibly collapsed, the once proud admiral shrinking into the shell of a broken old man. The camera would focus on that stunned, empty face, then fade slowly to black. The war at sea was not just fought with torpedoes and depth charges, but with numbers and letters, with logic and intellect. While soldiers fought on the beaches and sailors battled the waves, a secret army of codebreakers in the English countryside waged a silent war that saved countless lives and shortened the conflict by years. Their names were unknown, their victories uncelebrated until decades later. They were the quiet heroes who shattered Germany's most perfect weapon, proving that in the end, the greatest secrets are the ones you can never imagine being told.